Welcome to the I Do Wedding Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Nina Adio, a social media marketing expert specializing in the wedding industry. Each week, we'll explore the strategies, stories, and insider tips that help wedding professionals thrive. You'll hear solo episodes filled with actionable advice for social media and inspiring conversations with esteemed wedding industry guests. Thank you for tuning in and letting this podcast be a part of your day. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the I Do Wedding Marketing Podcast. This is Nina here, and I'm excited for another episode with you guys. Now, at the time this episode goes live, I will either be getting ready for or at the Inclusive Wedding Summit. And while I was getting ready for this summit, everybody kept telling me, well, not everybody, it felt like everybody. Everybody was saying, you have got to speak to Erin Perkins from Mabely Q. You have to speak to her. You're going to love her, and she has so much to say. So who am I to say no to that? I knew I wanted to speak to Erin, and Erin was gracious enough to come on the show. So today we're going to be speaking with Erin Perkins. Let me introduce you to her, okay? She is your go-to accessibility educator. Drawing from her experiences as a deafblind individual, Erin champions genuine inclusion across all levels and does not exclusively, but she does speak specifically to the wedding industry. Originally a graphic designer, she pivoted to become an educator and speaker in accessibility when she recognized the widespread lack of awareness in small to medium-sized businesses. Erin empowers socially conscious business owners and organizations to cultivate accessible businesses, not just website. She fosters a judgment-free environment, encouraging open dialogue and questions. So that is what we're going to get to today on this episode. We're going to be talking about the impact of inclusivity and accessibility, specifically within the wedding industry. And I can't wait for you guys to meet Erin. Erin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Nina.
Erin, where are you coming from right now?
I am actually in South Lake Tahoe on the California side. Normally, I'm based in Maryland, but for this winter, we have relocated out west so that my husband can teach snowboarding.
Wow, that's exciting. Snowboarding. So do you ever snowboard yourself too?
Yes, I snowboard. Apparently, we've been snowboarding for 12 years. And don't get me wrong, I am still terrified every time I go snowboarding.
That sounds pretty accurate of how I would feel, even 12 years in. Before we get into the real meat of the interview, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about Mabely Q and how you got started and how the wedding industry became one of your focus areas.
So Mabely Q, I founded in 2018, right after I got laid off from working for a corporation, and I had always done graphic design. And at that point, I was like, if I apply for another job, and I had been applying for jobs, because I kind of had an inkling that my job might not exist. And I wasn't really getting any interviews despite having like 15 years of experience as a graphic designer. So I was like, let me just try this on my own, do graphic design and virtual assistant. And one of the things about that I discovered as a virtual assistant was I wanted to learn about the new tool, all of the different things. And I found it very hard to learn from other people because they weren't providing me access, because most people will not know this or even realize it because I can speak well and I can hear that with the help of tool. I am deafblind, so you're probably like, but she speaks. She's a deaf person. How can she interact? I always had speech therapy. I wear a hearing aid and a cochlear implant, and I only have about 40 degrees of central vision. So I can still do things, but I do need tools to help me. So for me to like watch a video, whether it's a TV show or like a workshop or something, and it's not having caption, had always posed difficulties for me. So I would start to reach out to different companies, be like, hey, I would like to learn from you, but I can't because you're not giving me that access. And then because most of these are solopreneurs, they would reach back out to me like, well, I would love to, but I don't know how to do it. Can you show me how? And I was like, I don't think I can because that wasn't the premise of my business. And I was like, I don't even know how to do this because I've always had stuff given to me because, corporation gave it to you, school gave it to you. They already had the system. I just went with it. So I so I decided I would learn a little bit about it. And during that time be I was also an assistant for a hair and makeup artist that was heavily involved in the wedding industry. And because I was based in DC, I met a lot of people in the wedding industry. And I just like love the wedding industry because I feel like they were very welcoming to me, and they were like, "Oh, what you're doing is really great." So after a while, I switched more of my business over to accessibility because I feel like businesses could benefit more from that from me because I can give them that true insight of what it's like to be a person with a disability and needing that access that you might not have otherwise.
Wow. So it's always, I love the stories that begin kind of with a layoff. Like you either become like the next great American novelist or you end up a business owner. Like sometimes that can really be the catalyst for some incredible change.
But sure, I never even thought I would be that person to own my own business because for me, I was taught that you would work for a corporation for a majority of your career. But that's not the case these days. And I feel like things are so different now that it's like the most you might stay at a corporation is maybe a few years just to get that experience. And then you're going to move on to the next thing.
Yep. Yep. Especially, based on your personality type. And I think that's what at least I know I like so much about being in the wedding industry is I get to work with so many other
Yeah.
like-minded entrepreneurial spirits and things like that.
For sure, for sure. There's so many different personalities that you meet. And like I also get to meet people from other cities, other countries. Like, I have like a couple like good friends based in Australia and Spain. And then, I'm really close with like a wedding influencer that is in New York City. So it's always fun to be like, like I have all these connections. You wouldn't have that if you stuck with a corporation. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah, some of the friends I've made through the industry feel as close as just any friends, that I've had through seeing every day at work or just from
Mm-hmm.
school. But I could get sidetracked just talking life with you so easily. We have
For
important
sure.
stuff to discuss. So I want to make sure I get to it. So let's start with for those who may not fully understand, what does accessibility mean in the context of the wedding industry?
So accessibility in the context, well, let's first define
Mhm.
accessibility. Accessibility is just a way of providing access to a service or a product in the way that anybody can use it. So say you have like you go to the store, I'm talking about like in person. Like you see how you have like the push button for the wheelchair user. But the reality is those aren't just for wheelchair users. They're also for people who are using strollers to push their kids through. It's also for people who might have a temporary disability that are on crutches. They use that. Or it's people that might have their hand full. They have no disability, but their hands are full. They can't like open the door themselves. So they use their elbow to push the button to open the door so that they can get in the building. Now, when we talk about the wedding industry, you might be like, well, people with disabilities don't belong in the wedding industry. And that was something that I always felt like growing up, that I would not be one to get married because, I'm broken according to the rest of the world. It's very different because accessibility in the wedding industry to me is like making sure all your guests have the same a similar experience in however way they want to experience the wedding. Because we all have grandparents, we all have older people that might be in wheelchairs and stuff, and you want them to be part of your wedding. And if your venue is not accessible, that means they can't experience the same thing. It's also about food. You might not think that food is a disability. It isn't a disability, but people have food allergies, they have food sensitivity, and that kind of thing. You might also think about music. Like, you think that people don't listen to music, you could be very so wrong. Because deaf people love music. Like, some of my friends, they are always rocking out to music every single day, and they're like, "Have you heard of this?" And I'm like, "No." Like, they still want to be part of dancing on the dance floor, but they would appreciate if you had some kind of karaoke machine that shares the lyrics so that they can follow along with the song. It's little things like that that really just make the experience of the wedding that much more special.
What I really like about that is that you mentioned the guest experience too, and that's because from the scope of a business owner and wedding business owners, we can just think about the couple sometimes and essentially the booking, right? But it's so much more than that. It's the experience of what happens after the booking too, and that it matters beyond the surface. It matters for people's families, for their guests, for their experiences. So I like that you went into the guest experience right away.
I know, like, a lot of couples or even like wedding vendors are probably thinking, but it's always about the couple. But is it really? If it's really just about the couple, go elope.
Yes, yes, that's a great point. That's a great point. Are there other barriers that are common that people with disabilities face when planning or attending a wedding?
I think for me, from my own point of view, I attended all of my cousin's weddings, and my whole family's here, and except for me and my sister. And one of our challenges is always, how do we understand the people at that are speaking on when you have the minister priest talking and having them take the vow. Like, I don't get to be part of that because they're not providing interpreters, and I can also understand that interpreters are expensive, especially if they're just like, but it's just you two. And I do legitimately understand that. So I am always proactive and tell them, can you please have like a transcript or something available so that I can follow along? Because, like, I can understand the expense. But if you have a lot more people than just two people that are deaf attending, that's when you want to consider, do you have an interpreter? Do you have a person that is typing everything that's being said? Those little things like that.
Was it hard to get to that place of understanding where it's, I understand the expense, I understand it's just me and my sister?
Not for my immediate family because I feel like they do truly understand, even though like most of them don't sign. But I think they're like, we invited you, we want you to take part of this. So they are like, okay, not a problem. They just like tell their planner, can you make sure this happens? And we just stay on top of it. But for those who might not have that close relationship with the guest or attendee, or from a wedding, a person who is getting married standpoint. So me and my husband here, and I'm deaf. So one of the biggest things was like trying to communicate to because we got married out overseas. That was an interesting experience because trying to communicate to the planner that I need to be able to understand the person who was like marrying us, that didn't go so well. In hindsight, if I had looked back, I would have been much more like upfront about it, much more of like make sure these are the words that are being said so I can understand it. But if you're speaking from a guest point of view, sometimes it's helpful to have whoever is coordinating your event to already have these questions in mind because as a couple, you're often not going to be thinking about that. You're focused on yourself. But if you're a planner, you're a coordinator, a planner, your job is essentially to make sure that everything goes well for the couple. But you also want to make sure that the guests are also having an amazing experience as well. So it's your job to ask those questions like, hey, do you have any guests that are maybe disabled? Please do not be afraid to use the word disabled. No, it's not a bad word, it's not a dirty word. Because then they can think about, then the couple can be like, you know what, let me ask our parents, because usually your parents are the ones who come up with the guest list, if there's things that we need to think about. And then you can go back and forth with that. And I think that makes things easier because then the couple is not having to think about everything else.
Great. So would you say that adding these questions into some point of the process or a questionnaire at some point would be a good practice to do?
Oh, 100%. I think having it part of your process, whether it is onboarding or it is throughout the process of thinking about, do we need to think about if anybody's allergic to anything? Do we need to think about lighting? Do we need to think about having a quiet space set up for people who need it? That kind of thing.
Yes. Do you have any other simple, actionable steps that wedding professionals can take to make their businesses more accessible and inclusive online or in person?
I think one of the biggest things for me, if you're a wedding professional, have several different ways for people to reach out to you. I understand that for some people, they're like, oh, I only want phone call. But like for someone like me, I benefit greatly more from virtual conversation because I have the caption available to me. But if you are like, oh, I only meet my clients in person all the time, if it's somebody that has a physical disability or even a chronic illness, that might not make sense for them. So like it takes so much energy for them to have to go meet you as a vendor because it's just a lot of work. So if you can like simplify it and say, hey, we can either meet in person, we can meet online, we can communicate through email. Although I feel like you want some semblance to make sure that person is real. So that's like how I would look at it. It's like video or speaking on the phone or in person. I feel like those cover all the bases.
How can a wedding professional ask if there are any of these considerations without, what's the proper way to ask this rather than having when somebody says, I don't want to meet in person, you don't want to respond going, why? Are you disabled? How can they have these
Right. I would
conversations?
say one of the questions that you can always include is like, do you have any accommodation requests that are needed? So, and that kind of like will show to me that you are thinking about if a person has a disability or a person just has different needs than somebody else that is completely able-bodied, but they don't necessarily want to reveal that. Then they can say, yes, I want you to consider that we need to meet in person, or even if you are a baker, say you usually meet with people in person at your bakery. But for this person, knowing that, say they are in a wheelchair and they can't necessarily go to your bakery because the bakery is not accessible because you're in like an older building, a historical building. I feel like this happens a lot, that you're not able to go to that. So the bakery needs to consider that they can bring things and meet with that person or find a public place where they can actually do this experience. So it's little things like that that you want to like consider adding it into the questionnaire, saying, hey, what accommodation can I make for you?
Would you say the contact form is a great way to do that, or to wait further in the process?
I kind of want to say it doesn't necessarily have to be the contact form. Because the contact form might be a way for the vendor to filter out the people. So I would probably wait until like a little further along to like determine, yes, this is somebody that I do want to make sure I'm gonna hire. They're gonna hire me, that kind of thing. So
While we're talking kind of about the contact form, I know this is more so, especially, kind of back in the day where so many things would be required forms and required pieces of the contact form. And let's say not being able to accept a form until you put in a phone number, for example, are some of these things that we're requiring becoming really not really accessible or helpful to others?
one of the things I will say is do have your website and your contact form evaluated to make sure that it is accessible to people who might use a screen reader, who might not be able to physically use a mouse, so they have to use the keyboard to access the form. And all you really need to do using the keyboard is testing it out with a tab and like play around with that. Learn how other people need to access your content. And and then screen reader is also something that is interesting because I can't test that out because I can't understand the screen reader. So that is something that is designed for people who have low vision or are blind that would rather have the contact form for them to fill out. If they can't fill it out, they will probably want to email you or call you. And I know for a fact that there are vendors that will be like, please fill out the form. I understand why, because you want to streamline things, but there might be a reason why they're emailing you because they can't access the form. And I will say 75% of the problem is because the form is not accessible.
Where can people go to check these things like you mentioned?
I will actually send you some links to show you how you can test and check the forms and stuff to make sure that they are accessible. But the number one thing I do recommend is for you to do a website accessibility audit to make sure that your website is accessible.
Great. And now, is that something you offer or that you recommend through other services?
Website specifically, I refer to other people because it is a beast in and of itself. So I'd rather have somebody else do it. But I evaluate and audit every other part of your business, from social media, podcast, if you have one, email marketing, your brand, your event, whether you do in person, online. I think that's it.
It's a lot. You do a lot of great work. And there's so many things to consider. We got a bit into the consultations. What about how can wedding professionals ensure other communications like emails and contracts are accessible to everyone?
This is really tough because, like, honestly, I know that a lot of wedding professionals are probably using customer CRM, and a lot of these tech companies were not built with accessibility in mind. And that I feel like has hurt a lot of different companies that have children to use these platforms. I know this for a fact because it's affected me as well. Because, for example, I use LifeCut as my learning platform. However, it was not designed with accessibility in mind. But because I'm a one person company, I can't afford like the big fancy stuff. So I do put a disclaimer in saying like I understand that if you are not able to access this, please reach out to me and I will give you another way to access this because that is the easiest way that I can go about it. Because I still want to give them that similar experience, but I can't necessarily do that without putting myself thousands and thousands of dollars into debt. So, with that said, when you were talking about contact forms and using CRM, I want to encourage you to go through it as if you were the client or and see what that experience is like. Testing it out using a screen reader, testing it out using the keyboard, touching it out just by seeing what the actual user experience would be like. Because, like, I know for me, there was one wedding website I ended up on. And the brand color, beautiful pink, white, could not read the website. Could not read it at all. And I was like, oh goodness. Like, I can only imagine how many people were deterred from wanting to go to the website because the color contrast just wasn't there. And that's like what I do basically is I look at like your branding. I look at your business process and I find the gap and tell you how you can improve that experience without forcing you to feel like you have to change your whole system. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that people are so scared of is so like if I have Erin audit my business, I'm gonna have to change everything. That's not my goal. My goal is for you. If you have been in business for 10 years, 5 years, you built a process. I just want to go in and look at it and be like, there's something missing here. We need to add this piece in. We need to add this piece in to make it that much better. And one of the number one ways that we can do that is by making sure that your colors, your brand colors, meet the color contrast standard. And that usually will improve the accessibility experience by 50%.
And that's the color contract standard?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before.
Really?
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the time, colors, like branding colors, you'd be surprised that, and especially in the wedding industry, you're always either using very light colors. You'd be surprised at how many colors fail that color contrast standard.
Wow, I will have to check that out. As you were speaking about that, it made me think of Brian Lawrence and the Inclusive Wedding Summit, which is how we got connected because Brian was somebody where he went through that with you and was like, asking for that feedback, asking to get eyes on the product. So could you tell me a little bit using that as an example of some things maybe you brought up to Brian or what that experience was like?
Sure. So one of the things that Brian had reached out to me was saying that he wanted to build an website accessibility overlay. And I point blank said that's not gonna work. And he was like, but why? It's supposed to be wonderful. That it can be wonderful. But the reality is overlay is usually one of those buttons that you see in the corner of your website that has like a little like man
Mm-hmm.
thing, and you click on it and it'll allow you to change different things in terms of color, dark mode, light mode. making the font bigger, all of that stuff. But the reality of those overlays is literally a Band-Aid fit. We all know Band-Aids don't last. They fall off after a day or two. And that's like what that is for the website. It's just a Band-Aid fit. It doesn't mean you have fixed any of these problems. And that's like how I'm approaching it, was like, you don't want to put a Band-Aid fit. You want to make sure that you resolve the problem and you've created a much better experience from the start because you fixed the problem. And it's actually cheaper for you to fix the problem than it is for you to put a Band-Aid fit, because then the problem's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and then so I think what we discovered happened was that Brian then just kept trying and wanting to listen and wanting to do more. So now we're gearing up for his summit that will be happening. I'm not sure if it will be already happened when the podcast goes live or the week of. I want to get it out before, just so we can kind of celebrate it happening. But I know he was really grateful to break you down and get some of your insights. How can wedding professionals advocate for accessibility beyond their own businesses to encourage broader change?
I would say if you are connecting with other wedding vendors and you notice something, like say you're a planner and you know and you're working with a caterer and they have a buffet table set up, and you've noticed that they don't have any labels on any of the food, that's something where you can say, it would be really helpful for you to include labels on the food and the ingredient so that people can make their own decision whether that is a food that they can eat or not eat. Little things like that, and speaking up, saying like, if you notice that a brand new venue has been built and you notice that it's all stairs and there's no ramp, although I'm pretty sure that can't happen because you have to meet the American Disabilities Act regulation in terms of building. That's a whole other ballgame. But it's like speaking up and standing up, learning from people with disabilities, like follow them on Instagram, follow them on social media or whatever platform you prefer. Learn from them, ask questions, and really be genuine about, like, you know what, I really want to learn. I might not have been perfect. Because that's the one thing that I try to create, is a non-judgmental free zone in my world, because I realize that I might actually be the first person with a disability that people have met, and they've never really interacted with somebody with a disability, and you might have questions. Try to ask like questions that you're like genuinely curious about. Don't make fun of people with disabilities. Take it in stride. Know that, like, hey, if you messed up, like, all right, how can I do better next time? Because we all have to acknowledge that we're not all perfect. And we're all really just trying to create an amazing experience for the couple that are getting married.
So, in that spirit, what do you hope to see in the wedding industry in the next few years regarding accessibility and how individual vendors and venues can lead the way in fostering true inclusion?
One of the biggest things that I really hope to see in the wedding industry is more like acceptance among showing that people with disability do get married, and that it's not going to cost them 10 times as much to get the same access as if you weren't disabled, because people with disabilities are already incurring a lot more cost in their own life, that it can be very frustrating when you're like, well, that's going to be an added cost because we need to provide you access. But the reality is, like, we just want to live normal lives as everybody else. So, like, I hope with the wedding industry, is you're going to start bringing in and including people with disability in your, when you do those, like the vendor list, the collab, all of that. Include people with disabilities in that decision-making process, so we can help you make the whole experience that much better.
Not only did this conversation leave me feeling informed, but really inspired, which I'm, I imagine everybody else is going to feel too. It makes me feel excited for the changes I can make and the knowledge and power, right, that you've provided with us all. So I really want to thank you for that. Where can people, and I will have everything in the show notes, but where do you recommend people reach out to you first? If they're really inspired about this journey, where should they begin?
I would say reach out to me through my Instagram account, which is Mabely, Mabely_Q. Or you can go to my website, which is mabelyq.com, no space. And I also do want to share, I do have an event accessibility booklet that I designed it with keeping the wedding industry in mind. And it's not just for wedding planners or coordinators, because I feel like any vendor, and I've included everything, as many vendors as possible, and tips of how they can improve accessibility in their own business in an easy way that's not going to cost you as much money as you think. You might think accessibility is going to cost me money, but I've done it in a way that I feel like you're going to feel confident in making improvements to your business and being more accessible to everybody.
Thank you so much. I'll include all of the show notes below with all those links. And Erin, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Nina.